Well, we're here to talk about when you have young kids and you're a parent, or you have lots of kids, or you have lots of young kids. And those seasons can be challenging. They can be hard. We've had a lot of people say to us, because we have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and then our third is on the way, due in September. And a lot of people have said, enjoy this season. It's the best time of your life. And we've kind of felt like, on the one hand, it really is joyful. So there's truth in that. On the other hand, it can be exhausting and it can be humbling. Usually when someone says that during the statement, one of our kids is chucking a chicken nugget across the room, or, there's some kind of meltdown happening or something. And so we've talked a lot about just how challenging it can be for the kids to become the emotional center. And they can take so much energy that the marriage can really suffer. And so we've had to work really hard at having healthy rhythms and healthy habits that can keep the marriage strong during those seasons. So we do things like we have a date night in once a week where we put the kids to bed early and talk about a chapter of a book, and that's been helpful. We do a lot of walks because the kids are quiet in the stroller, and we found things like that have been helpful. What have you guys found helpful for growing your marriage in those seasons where it's so demanding and it's so difficult?
Well, I'm a big advocate of routine for this very reason. So we had 4 children in 4 years, and so early on it was quite the circus. And we got as quickly as possible into a sleep routine with the kids so that they would be, we're done at 7 o'clock. Mm-hmm. It's Jeff and me on the couch talking about our day or whatever it is that we had. And in fact, as the kids got older and we could not put them, like they're in high school and they're like, yeah, we're not going to bed at 7 anymore. And we're like, well, you really could. Mm-hmm. We lost our evenings because the kids were awake now until 10 and 11 at night doing homework and needing help. And so it threw us off in a later season of life with like, wait a minute, this was the time we had carved out and now you people will not go to bed. But in the early years, it was a big help to us to have every night, around 7:30, it was just the two of us. And then we developed some shared interests and hobbies that could happen in the home or around the home. So we both really got into gardening because, you could go in your front yard and do something, but you couldn't leave them and go across town unless you were going to pay for a sitter. So we got really into things like that. We tried to share. It was all about trying to develop, like, what's a show that we both like to watch, but finding ways to where when the kids were off the radar, we weren't just going and doing our own things. We were looking for things to do together. Cooking, we cooked together.
That one doesn't happen in my house together. But we do walk a lot together. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, I can still, when I get to certain places and walks, I can remember the various conversations we were having. It could have been about the Bible. It could have been about the sermon. We walk a lot on Sundays. And so it just gives us that time together to talk to one another and just process life. And we really tried, especially on our date nights, I would say we did this poorly at first, but we learned from our mistake. I used to spend our date nights thinking, oh, now's the time I can talk about all the things I've been waiting to talk to him about, be it schedule, being the things I think we need to work on in our marriage, which makes for a real fun date.
Yeah, that's
right?
super fun.
And so after those failed to be fun anymore, we both came to the realization we need to take our date nights and just have fun with one another again. You're doing so much work together in the home when you have young children that you constantly feel like you're passing the football in some ways of, will you change this diaper now while I'm doing this? Mm-hmm. So it's nice to have a time when you can just go out and just be together and try not to talk about responsibilities, but just have fun together. And sometimes that gets forgotten with young children, that there's fun to be had with one another.
Yeah, sometimes being a parent can bring up your fears and your insecurities, and you can see the struggles of your spouse. And so we've talked a lot about the importance of having compassion on each other and having forgiveness and grace and, kind of having a gospel tone in our family life. I think sometimes we talk about, forgiveness, and Ephesians 4:32 says, be brokenhearted in your forgiveness toward each other. And sometimes we think about those verses and we apply them to our neighbor more quickly than we apply them to the people in our own family. And so we've talked about just how important it is to have a tone of the gospel and a tone of warmth and practicing kindness in our family. And one of the things we've done to try to protect that is my wife and I have just made an agreement that we're never going to complain about each other to our friends. We're never going to complain about our spouse, and I don't have anything to complain about anyway, but she probably does. But even if we did, we're just not going to do that because we want to protect this sense of safety and warmth and love. Have there been things that you guys have thought about that have been helpful to try to have a gospel environment in your family?
Yeah, I would agree. We would say that what the most foundational revelation for us as parents was that our children are our neighbors. And so, we have a tendency to be kindest to the people who are the furthest outside of our home and to sort of treat those who are closest to us with the least amount of civility. And that was something that we just determined is we wanted to have a home where we treat each other with civility, because civility is really preferential love. And so that meant that in addition to, I love what you said about not speaking, disrespectfully of each other with your friends, but also in front of the kids, like very much not wanting to show frustration if Jeff drops the ball on something or vice versa, just that we're going to let love cover a multitude of sins and we're going to keep going. And as far as the kids are going to perceive, it's that I love him and he loves me and we're for each other. So that, and that we want them to be for each other as well. And that was another thing that really defined the way that we thought about parenting, was to tell the kids that they were each other's best friends, even when they didn't believe it, and even when we weren't sure it would really work, right? And then to actually see them internalize that and reckon. And Jeff was always so great about saying, he'd be like, "Hey, who's your best friend in third grade?" And they'd say, "Susie." And he'd say, "Do you know who my best friend was in third grade?" And then they'd say, "No." And he'd say, "Me neither. I have no idea where that kid is now. But guess what I do know? I know where my sister is, and I love her, and she's my best friend." And so that was a really great thing he brought to our home, was just a sense of, these are the people who you're going to be with for your whole life, and so we should treasure them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I even think in that it starts in our minds. Being prepared in our minds of how we're going to think about one another.
Yeah.
And really having a gospel-centered understanding of one another, which means I will fail you and you will fail me. So there will be things that we could, if we wrongly wanted to go talk to other people about. But to have that sense of grace with one another, to know from the beginning that we've all sinned and we will all be weak with one another, and it's going to happen even more in the home, just because of proximity and time. So our sin is going to rub against one another in the home more than any other place. So it's the greatest place to get to extend grace, because that's where you can't escape it. If a friend's bothering you, you can just spend less time maybe with them. But here is where really Christ's love has to be manifest in us in the greatest way possible, is in our love for our spouse and then also in our love for our children. But I think it starts with the right expectation that he's not going to be perfect. I'm not going to be perfect. And we can really go into marriage with a works-based mentality. You're going to bring all this good stuff to the table, and then of course I'm going to live up to all the good stuff I'm supposed to bring. But eventually we will run out of self-love for one another, or what's in our own hearts. And we're going to have Christ welling up in us to empower us to love one another. So in some sense, I think one of the deepest ways we do that is find our greatest love and expectations in Christ and then share that with each other. But it starts in the home first. They are our closest neighbors. And I think they're really where we see is the gospel manifested in me. Because it's much easier to love someone who lives 3 states away and be great to them.
Good. Thank you both.